Okay, here we are at Alouette Lake again. It was a beautiful man-made lake in 1920. The forest was clear-cut. This Alouette River was used to flood this valley due to the building of a dam behind you there, which you cannot see, but Alouette Lake is a fairly small lake, but it does right over there, it goes into the Narrows and then into another part of the lake that you can't see. But the mountains come together here. There's a little path through the water there, and then it's called the Narrows. And on the other side is another lake like this that opens up between the mountains. That's also called Alouette Lake. This is all Alouette Lake. Anyway, today this is Statistical Shenanigans, Part 2. And I promised to continue this from Part 1, as Part 1 got kind of long, about half an hour, so I ended it there, and we'll continue with this part at the request of several of the readers. Okay, so I'm speaking of scientific rigor in the age of COVID-19, and the scientific rigor seems to have decreased and waned since the beginning of the pandemic, and not exactly sure why, except that maybe there's less control. People just aren't as stringent in what they're doing. Neurological problems, depression, lack of funding, lack of money, loss of jobs, etc. may have all influenced the scientific rigor of the scientific and medical research that's going on and being published. And the reason I say that is I review a lot of articles, all of the articles in JAMA, Journal of the American Medical Association, and the New England Journal of Medicine, for example, and Lancet. But I've noticed that the quality of the research has really gone downhill since COVID-19 started. And as I presented in Part 1, the statistical shenanigans that are taking place in many of the articles just make the scientific validity, or just makes them invalid, basically, if not corrupt, and perhaps even fraudulent, in my opinion. Okay, but that's only my opinion. Others can review the topic and decide for themselves. The one that I mentioned last time was the imputation of missing data. That is, they do a study, there's not enough data, or there's some parts of the data are missing, parts weren't completed, etc. So they average the data from all of the patients that are available and put that data into the missing or imputation of the data, which is totally unscientific. I mean, I guess other than the fact that maybe you're averaging and they consider that valid, but that is absolutely not valid. And I wrote an article, several articles on this, and I do go into more detail of what the problems can be and why it's not valid. And you can look at that in ResearchGate and academia.edu for further discussions. And I would call this, quote, fudging the data. We used to call it fudging the data when people made up data. But now it seems to be accepted. I mean, it's put as a methodology in the experiments when they write it up and publish their papers. They don't say fudging the data, they say some fancy word like imputation of missing data, which makes it sound really fancy. Or bootstrapping, which is another term where they don't have enough data, so they extrapolate enough data to increase the power of the study to make it statistically significant. But the bootstrapped information is basically made up. Again, it might be averaged from other patients, but it's additional made up data. And I would call that fudging the data. Now seems to be totally acceptable. In the old days, when I started in this field, this was not acceptable. Nobody would even consider doing something like that. Okay, and again, I mentioned the point, you can prove anything with statistics. So that's basically what they're doing nowadays, and a lot of the studies seem to be politically motivated. For example, testing drugs either for or against COVID-19 to prove either they're useful or not. It doesn't seem to matter that if the study is valid or not, if they're really going to help the patient or really going to hurt the patient. It's just, did somebody political say to do this? Did they promote certain drugs? And is that why they're doing the study? So to me, and again, this is just my opinion, but it seems like a lot of the current studies and studies over the last year and a half have been motivated by politics and not by the science. And there's lots of evidence. You just have to watch the news and read the news articles to see a lot of evidence of this. Okay, and again, this is rampant in the literature. Now, I try to comment when I notice things like this happening, and I've done this about 100 times over the past year with comments to the major medical journals on how I felt that they were fudging the data basically with these statistical methods. And some of the articles are rejected, some are not, following my discussions and comments. But I would like to point out that this really seems to be rampant in the medical literature lately. So if you're publishing, if you're doing research, I would be really careful. Someday this is going to come back to haunt you when finally the articles in the literature, people have a chance to catch up with them and really analyze them. The other thing, if you're treating patients and you're basing your treatment on these studies, I would be really careful and go over them very carefully before I either deny treatment or accept a certain treatment for patients, especially with COVID-19 at this time, because that seems to be the main result of this rampant abuse of scientific methods. Okay. Anyway, this is not good for the future of medicine, for the future of the ethical treatment in medicine, for the future of our reputations in medicine. If we're bowing to the pressures of the politicians, that is not good, and eventually the public will see through that. It's going to ruin reputations, and which it has already, but will do a lot worse in the future when this is all analyzed and final results are in. So don't bow to the pressures of the politicians. Don't fall prey to the fraudulent methods of statistical analysis, such as imputation of missing data, such as bootstrapping, which is a fairly new term, but as far as what I understand, it seems to be just totally fudging the data. Anyway, again, my personal opinion, politicians right now seem to be, and for the past 2 years, seem to be in control of the medical research. Obviously, they're in control of the funding, which is important, but not all physicians depend on the funding, and not all physicians even who depend on the funding, are swayed by these corrupt methods and producing results only for the politicians. I would just like to say the people in the health department usually are not swayed by politicians, even though their jobs can be political, but they're supposed to be unbiased and follow the medical literature, which unfortunately for this COVID-19, this is a new illness. There's not much medical literature on the actual COVID-19, but I do note that we have been through 100 pandemics through the centuries, and things are very similar, and if you follow the course of previous pandemics, you can't go wrong with the basics. For example, 1918, it really followed a similar course to COVID-19, and we're on the the triple peak of incidence and mortality rates, and that was exactly what happened in 1918. So go from history, follow history, don't forget history, stay ethical, stay honest, use good statistics, the old good statistics like I learned with no fudging of the data. So anyway, that is the statistical shenanigans I was talking about, part 2. The last part I was advised and requested to comment on is the part where people are swayed by their funding. And at the end of every article, the authors and the researchers are supposed to put, who's paid them, who's influenced them. If anybody from a drug company, for example, if a drug they're testing has said anything or tried to influence them or paid them. Even a meal is considered corruption. And so this is called conflict of interest. And there's a section now in all the research articles where all of the authors and researchers have to note their conflict of interest. Now, in the old days, especially when I was an expert in court or doing my own research, we just ignored articles and research studies that where people noted a major conflict of interest. But if you look at the articles nowadays, like in Lancet, New England Journal of Medicine, Journal of the American Medical Association, there's like half a page of conflicts of interest at the bottom of every article. And in the old days, I would have just ignored an article like that. But now almost all of the articles have that. So, and often the researchers are paid by the exact same company that is producing the drugs that they're studying. What a conflict of interest. That's totally biased, if you ask me. And again, this is just my opinion, but again, normally I complain about this, and I have complained, and it has been published. But again, I believe it is unethical. I don't think I would do it myself. I looked online, and apparently I did receive a meal from a drug company, but I never did any research for that drug company. But there's a record of 10 years ago me getting a meal. That's okay. So that was my conflict of interest, but it did not involve any of my research or publications. But you'll see that, some of the people writing papers and doing research are getting millions of dollars from a drug company or a medical device company. that's amazing. Again, normally I would discount and just ignore such papers. If a doctor ever went as an expert witness to court with one of those papers, they'd be torn to bits. Anyway, okay, so that's my last point on conflict of interest, and that has to go along with the statistical shenanigans that I've just completed, two-part series over the last hour. So anyway, have a good life, enjoy the rest of these days. And it was raining when I got here, but now it's nice and sunny, so God is shining on us, and we will get over this. COVID-19 is coming to a close, hopefully fairly soon, and hopefully there's not a lot of variants or mutations developing, and the vaccine, everyone gets it, will hopefully be covered. Okay, thank you. This Dr. Gary Ordog ending this dictation for YouTube. And please subscribe to my channel, Gary Ordog, if you like this. And please stay safe. And please get your vaccination. Thank you.